Good evening, Dr. Mezzanotte. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule for this interview. I know LaSalle College High School is very proud to count you as one of its alums, class of 1976. From there, you went on to graduate from Villanova and Penn Medicine. You were the chief resident in internal medicine at Jefferson, and then went on to do a fellowship in pulmonary and critical care medicine at the University of Colorado. You were in academic and clinical practice for close to 10 years. Now, as Executive Vice President for Global Research and Drug Development for CSL Behring, you have initiated a strategic alliance to use plasma as the means to beat COVID-19. The alliance has received much praise, including by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The combination of your training plus the company you work for puts you in a unique position in this fight against COVID-19. You truly embody the message we at LaSalle are all taught. Enter to learn, leave to serve. So to start it off, can you tell us how convalescent plasma therapy works in the fight against COVID-19?
Sure. And first of all, thanks, Emmet, for inviting me to this interview. And thank you for the kind introduction. And I am a proud LaSalle graduate. And just so you know the irony, I am a graduate of 1976, which was the bicentennial year. And that's also traced to be the time where the AIDS epidemic actually started in the United States. So my time at LaSalle ended at the start of one grave epidemic, and now I'm here in another pandemic.
Yeah.
So, life continues to circle around. But back to your question, I think it's important for the audience maybe if I give you a kind of overarching framework of COVID-19 and how this fits in. So I'm just going to share my screen here for a minute and hope I do this right. So this is a framework really for addressing the COVID crisis. And you go from left to right, from mild to very severe. And so, of course, on the left, in the general population or in high-risk individuals or healthcare workers, we're trying to prevent the infection. And that's what we're all doing right now. We're social distancing. We're hoping that the warmer weather brings a reduction in the amount of virus. But vaccines, of course, is what people are hoping for in the longer term. And they're difficult to create, and they're going to take time. At the very far end is when you get into the ICU, people on ventilators, people in respiratory distress. You've heard those stories. And there are a lot of trials going on with drugs called monoclonal antibodies, which attack certain cytokines in the body to try to reduce the inflammation and make the patient recover. There are other therapies going on there as well. In the big middle, though, you get patients who might get infected, have some level of illness, either moderate or severe, may actually have to be hospitalized. And at that point, your goal is to reduce the severity of the infection, either reduce or prevent hospitalization, or actually keep them out of the ICU and let them go home earlier. And this is where antivirals, the hyperimmunes, which I'll talk about, or convalescent plasma that you've heard a lot about, have its effect. Now, today you asked me to talk about convalescent plasma and hyperimmunes, and that's what I will focus on. But just so you know, what's ironic about CSL is that we have platforms across all these areas. So we work on vaccines on the right. We're in the respiratory therapeutic area. And we have plasma fractionation that leads to recombinants leads to hyperimmunes, and recombinant technology that leads to monoclonal antibodies. So one of the lessons I learned at LaSalle was chance favors a prepared mind. And I think CSL, by being prepared in all these areas, has a chance to really make an impact on the COVID illness. So let me just step back and say, okay, before I get to even talking about hyperimmunes, how an infection works in you and me normally, and we get the cold or we get another virus, is you experience the virus, you get some symptoms, hopefully you don't get too many symptoms, but you may be sick for a few days, and your body starts gradually building up antibodies to fight that. What a vaccine is trying to do is give you those same antibodies, but not having you experience the illness or experience a very mild form of the illness. And we hope that ultimately in things like polio, chickenpox, that these vaccines can be long lasting, but sometimes, such as in the flu, it's only lasts for about a year and then you have to be revaccinated. And that's what they're studying right now with vaccine research. What hyperimmunes are meant to do is take antibodies from somebody who's recovered, concentrate them, and give you those antibodies before you've been ready to make them yourself. And so you start to fight the infection earlier and more efficiently than you normally would. And that's the hope of hyperimmunes. So what hyperimmunes require is the collection of donor plasma, as does convalescent plasma, which you mentioned, which you hear a lot about in the news. So let me tell you the differences between the two, and I have it up on this screen now. So on our left is convalescent plasma donation. It's people who've recovered from COVID-19 donate their plasma. This convalescent plasma then is taken and fairly quickly infused into a single patient, hoping that that one-to-one donation will make a difference. And there has been some anecdotal evidence that it's worked. And we're waiting for a clinical trial to determine whether it actually works consistently or not. The level of the antibodies, though, in that plasma can be very variable. So you might get a very severe case of illness, or you get high antibody titers, and the next person might get very low. So there's not a good control of those antibody levels. In addition, there's about 3,500 proteins in the body, and you're really only looking for one or two. And so you're giving people a lot of extra proteins from another person, which could potentially cause some difficulty down the road. But I think the real issues are that this is not very scalable. If you want to donate your plasma to somebody at the same hospital, that's great, but you really can't give it to somebody in Iowa or somebody in California. And this is not a really very scalable long-term solution. Hyperimmunes, on the other hand, take the same convalescent plasma, mix them together, and you get a very concentrated amount of antibodies at actually much lower volume. And we can, through manufacturing, make it a very narrow window of potency, so we're pretty consistent and reliable with our medicine. Beyond that, of course, we take a lot of steps in purifying it. So some of those other proteins are taken out, and then we can make it sustainable and scalable as well. And that's the hope of the difference between the two. So companies have been doing this for a while, Emmet. Companies have been making hyperimmunes. So this is not a new thing. And hyperimmunes have been used every day for things like rabies and and actually, we've made hyperimmunes before when we've had bad flu epidemics. But it takes time. You have to wait for the patients to recover, you collect them. And the point of this Plasma Alliance was to bring everybody together and do it quicker. And so, if I get to the last slide, we created this Covid-19 Plasma Alliance, where CSL Behring, the company I lead, and Takeda got together and said, hey, let's put all our efforts together and create an alliance that from start to finish helps collect plasma together, manufacture it together, get it clinically tested as soon as possible, and get it out the door to patients as soon as possible. And our hope is that we'll have this therapy for that middle area as early as the later part of this year. So I'll stop there and maybe see if you have any questions for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mezzanotte. That's really great. Now, how are you guys getting volunteers? I see the Red Cross is collecting convalescent plasma. Is the medical community working with you to recruit recovered patients, or is there a global campaign?
So the answer is all of the above. So first of all, plasma donation doesn't just happen during crises. So in this alliance, there's over 500 freestanding centers that collect plasma every day from people. And that plasma is used and and manufactured for other purposes such as hemophilia, primary immunodeficiency, hereditary angioedema, rare diseases where the proteins from somebody else, some of the other 3,500 proteins I was talking about, are life-saving for those patients. So we do this every day, and so we are taking advantage of those centers. That's number one. Number two, we do have a big advertising campaign, and I showed you that website quickly of COVID-19 Plasma Alliance. And there we are talking up plasma donation. The Health and Human Services has talked about this. The FDA website has promoting convalescent plasma. The president talked about it the other day. You mentioned Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They along with Microsoft, have helped create a website for us and other avenues for donation. And lastly, though, we are in fact aligning with academic institutions and even with Red Cross or similar organizations to share resources to do this better. Because this is a big fight, and it requires the work together in order to make this work.
Yeah, so you're really getting the word out there, which is great. And then finally, what advice would you give to LaSalle students looking to pursue a career in science and medicine?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say I am a proud LaSalle graduate, and I have had lots of education in my years, but I still count my fundamental education at LaSalle as really important. I think the teamwork that LaSalle is known for, working together, and the interdisciplinary part of it is really important. And I say in this alliance that we're working on has never been done before in the plasma industry. And I think part of the reason I was thought to start it was because of my time at LaSalle. And I like to say that in the fight about COVID, I would work with anybody to make it better, even somebody from St. Joe's Prep. But, but finally, what advice would I give? It two things. One, you have to be a lifelong learner. When I went to college, we got an introduction to molecular biology, which is so embarrassingly rudimentary now, Emmett, compared to what we know now. It's almost laughable. So you don't ever think you're going to stop learning. And two, I mentioned it before, the interdisciplinary approach. You know how in sports they talk about it's bad if you concentrate on one sport too soon in your life? Well, same with science is incredibly enriching and it requires a lot of focus, but don't forget the other humanities, because it's what makes the world go round. Science really helps, but people are still people. And the things we learn at LaSalle and things you learn outside of science are just as important. And collaborate, because you rarely can do it alone.
Dr. Mezzanotte, you commented that leaders lead during uncertainty.
Yep.
Thank you for being a leader.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the young men at LaSalle. It's really great to see the legacy continue. I know this is tough times for you as well, and resilience is something I try to teach everybody, and you're living resilience right now. But together we're going to get through this. The hope is there. Therapies are coming, and we'll hopefully get you all back to normal life as soon as possible. Take care and God bless.
Be well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.